everybody! Anomaly, I swear to criminally. Okay. You just said it's a train thing. What the hell have you done? We'll discuss that after the stream. We will discuss that after the stream. I swear, if you found a scrap steam locomotive, I'm going to cry. Because that is a very sad thing, and I don't want to have a sadness of a scrap steam locomotive. Like, no. Ah, my camera's not on. Oh, sorry, my camera wasn't on. So you found me something that you think I'm gonna like because I love trains. I hope you're right, because I sure do love my trains. And Cameron, hello! So, as promised, I have decided to come aboard and tell the prequel story to the last stream that I did. And for those who don't know, the last 3 or 4 streams I've done, I have told a story that I wrote a very, very long time ago. And I am excited to say that it's not a steam locomotive. Thank God. I feel much better now. I've decided that today we are going to tell the prequel story to the original story of the author and the woman. For those who don't know, yeah, I know, not the stream you were expecting for Thursday. And also SMH to, yes, I feel better that it's not a steam locomotive, but I'm still going to take a look at it after stream. I said it's a surprise. That's fair enough. Then don't tell me a single thing about it, and just leave it where you've left it. So for those who didn't know, the last 3 streams I did were telling a story that I wrote in high school. And we finally finished the climactic end of the story. And I put a poll up at the end of stream to decide whether or not we were going to do a continuation, so a sequel to that story, of a different adventure between the artist and our now not-so-mysterious woman, who the author's name was Alexandra Jones, and we now know that the woman's name was... I don't plan on saying anything. Thank you! The woman's name is Zena Warrior. And so, I asked chat in the previous stream if they wanted to have a sequel story or a prequel story. And by an overwhelming vote, the prequel story took off like a racehorse and was highly voted for. So, with that being said, I'm actually going to raise my microphone volume up a little bit. Hopefully that's okay with everybody. Never said how old. That's fine. We're gonna raise it up just a hair. A little bit louder than the BGM this time. I don't expect the BGM to be super freaking quiet, but I still want to, have it heard. Now, my frames are dropping a little bit. That's weird. I will also say now that on this stream, I have a new piece of setup. You can't see it on screen because I have it hidden away, but over here, I now have a drink cooler. It is a mini fridge, and I can open it up. I don't know how well you'll see it, but it is here. And I now can put my drinks in a mini fridge. And it stays nice and cold, and God, I love it. It's a Coca-Cola mini fridge. I freaking love it. But I'm a heathen, and I put Pepsi products in it, so... But yes, now I have a mini fridge, so my drinks don't go cold while streaming, which was something I was getting pissed at myself for. So, this story that we were going to tell today is... I've been working on it for a couple days now, and I've been thinking about it and how I wanted to tell it. This story is called... Cool! Yeah, I know, it's awesome. I'll try and show it on camera later. So here's how this stream is going to work. It's going to work very simply. I'm going to explain how this works. Oh yeah! We have StreamBot now! That's another thing I wanted to bring up. So for every so often when the new people come in, ball tracks, it's gonna be good. Yes, it is. It's gonna be amazing. So how this stream is going to work, it's going to work very simply. First of all, you guys can go ahead and talk in chat as much as you want. If you have questions about what I'm talking about, or if you didn't understand a little bit of the story, I will be more than willing to repeat or better explain it. Also, we have these new commands that pop up in chat. With you guys now talking, and with the ability of our loyalty point system, I realized that you guys didn't have access to the commands. So, I put a chat bot in place so that y'all can copy and paste the commands whenever you so wish. And now, anyone can have access to the commands, and every, I think it's 10 minutes or so, the chat bot will go off reminding everyone of the commands. I will be fixing it later, this is just a temporary thing, but there you go. There's all of the commands that you guys can use with your XP tokens. Feel free to use them throughout the stream. I will do my very best to catch every single one of them. I will warn you that some of them take a little bit of time to set up, so it will be pauses in between the story. Here's how the story stream is going to work. Throughout the stream, well, I'll possibly be back. Cat's annoying me because he wants either hugs or treats. That's okay, Anomaly. You go and snuggle that cat and give it some belly rubs for me. Here's how the stream is going to work. I'm going to tell the story in one shot. It's going to be one very long stream where I tell the entire story. That gives everyone the opportunity for a timestamp of when the story begins and when the story ends. When the story ends, I will do my very best to go back through chat and read all of chat. And I'll do everything I can to catch up to chat towards the end of the story. We'll also take breaks during the story, and I will put timestamps when the VOD comes out of when the story takes a breather so I can read chat, or I can catch up on where I am in the storyline. Now, I will not address chat right off the get-go at all points during the storytelling. I will do my best to address chat as much as possible, but I do want to make it a nice, smooth, and flowing story. His last 3 streams weren't quite as well. Should tell on that for you that you want to give him belly rights. Thank you, Anomaly. See, in the beginning, I can get the chat read, and everything will be fine. When we get to the point of storytelling, I'm completely okay with you guys cutting away or doing something else off camera and keeping the stream open to hear the story. When the story is over, like I said, I will fully read chat. I will do my very best to catch up as much as possible with whatever I've missed. If something special happens in chat, or say you guys do a redemption, I will do my best to catch that redemption during stream, and I will warn the people who are watching or listening to the story if, say, certain redeems do take place. Now, I just realized I don't have one of the redemptions. Where the hell did I put him? Where did I put that damn chicken? I don't know where I put my chicken. I'll find him later. If you guys redeem Honk, I might have to refund some people because I don't have my chicken so I can do Honk. Anyway, so we're going to start the story with a brief backstory of the previous story for those who didn't see it. Then we will continue into the actual true story. So, here's how... Oh, hello. Is my BGM screwing up? No, it's working fine. So, for those who did not see the previous story, a lot of you have seen the previous story, but I'm still going to give a recap just in case. Lol, I remember that chicken. Yeah, I got him. Hang on, I'll actually go find him real fast when we take one of the breaks. But for now, I'm going to do a brief recap of the story. I know it was only a couple days ago, but I feel like for the people who want to see this video and haven't seen the original story, they might need a recap. So, the previous story was called The Author and the Woman. That is the actual official title I've come up with. It's kind of a play on how it works, but it was about an author named Alexander Jones and a mysterious woman who we now know the name of, and they were doing their very best to try and solve one of Alex's own stories in real life. Someone took the stories and murdered 6 people based on one of the books that he wrote. And throughout the story, they learn more about each other, and they learn about the past of the woman. The woman's name was Zena Warrior. Turns out she was an empress of a continent, and the murders were being done by her brother. This is a huge spoiler warning for those who haven't seen it or want to hear it. By all means, go listen to that before you watch this VOD. Then we found out that she disappeared, and she later comes back and tells Alexander the truth about who she is and how old she truly is. We also learned throughout the story that she was adopted. And all of these things tie into this current prequel that chat voted on. So, I has the little fur baby now. Yay! So, I want everyone to sit back, relax, and enjoy this story. Now, before we start this story, there are two versions of this story. And I would like chat right now. We're going to take a vote, very briefly, but we're going to take a vote. And I'm going to see which version of the story chat wants. I gotta type this out because I was not ready for this. Alright, here goes the poll. We'll start up the poll. Go ahead and vote on whether you guys want the story in first person, which is exclamation mark vote number 1, or if you want it in third person, which is vote exclamation mark 3. For example, if you were to vote for first person, you would do it as such, and that registers 1 vote. It will not show up in chat that you've registered the vote, but I see that we've registered the vote, and I have voted, just as a demonstration, for first person. So I will let you guys pick that real quick while I go and try and find that chicken. Give me a second. Okay, I'm back. I found the chicken. It took me a minute, but I found the chicken. Alright, so we got 2 votes for first person. Alright. Does anyone else want to put in their votes before we continue on this amazing adventure? Because I am more than willing to, let anyone else vote. If they choose to vote, by all means, please put your votes in. We'll be closing the voting here in just a little bit. So, please hurry up and bring in your votes. Because we have 2 votes for first person. Alright. But yes, no, we found the chicken. So, if you scroll up through chat or scroll to chat, whatever, and you see the Streamlabs notification with all those different words and exclamation points, that's all of your commands. That will cycle through every now and then for people who forget. It's actually right above these. So all of the commands are spaced out so that you can copy and paste each one individually. Some of them, like exclamation mark gamble, you require to add a number afterwards. Exclamation mark slots, that one also is required for to add numbers afterwards. There's also dueling, there's heists, which I believe I can only do. And there's a couple other crazy ones that you guys can do, but all of those commands are ones that y'all can do for yourselves. So if someone does like exclamation mark honk during the middle of the story, this chicken will squeak. I'm going to get either a different honker, or I'm going to keep this chicken. Or I'm going to repaint this poor boy, because if you look at him, he's very worn out. He's been honked a lot on different streams. Alright. With that being said, we're going to close the voting. And I ain't surprised at all that first person won, because the previous story was first person. And you guys seem to really love first person stories, so we're going to tell another first person story today. Providing that my computer doesn't decide to all of a sudden break itself. Tends to do that. Complete. We'll delete the poll. Alright. The first person story of Zena Warrior, Empress of the Valley of the Wind. This story took me 2 nights to come up with. I know, sounds crazy. Came up with it in a couple of nights. But I was excited to tell the sequel of this story because I knew that people seemed to really enjoy the first story. This will be the last storytelling stream I do for a while, because I don't want to oversaturate with streaming. I do want to get some gaming streams in. We'll probably do a gaming stream coming up here on Saturday with some AI dungeon, and if I can really get it working, we'll do some either Among Us, People's Playground. We'll figure it out as we go. We'll probably do a variety stream on Saturday. But without further ado, we shall start with, well, as all good stories start on this channel so far, with the prologue. If I can remember if I came up with one or not. I don't actually think I came up with a prologue for this one. So, here we go. Hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, there was a continent that was hidden from the world. It was believed that this continent was ruled by people with unfathomable abilities. They had abilities that would melt the minds of man. It was called the Valley of the Wind. In this Valley of the Wind, there was an empress and an emperor, a father and a mother of 2 amazing children. These, the emperor and empress, are not the focal point of this story. The focal point of this story is the heir to the throne, Zena Warrior. I was a very young girl living in the Valley of the Wind. And just like any heir, I was completely oblivious to the impending job that I had when I became of age. My people are of the Valley of the Wind. We are simple folk, and we do not believe in war, and we do not believe in destruction. We believe in peace, or we believed in peace. My father and mother ruled the continent with almost 0 fatalities. Natural cause deaths did not count to them, but were mourned as such if they were lost in war. We were a proud race, and our continent was the most beautiful and most hidden gem on the planet. We had trees that stretched higher than the tallest buildings you could imagine, and we had rivers that flowed so wide it would take days to cross them. We had conventions, carnivals, and much more that would blow away anything I've ever seen in the United States. And yet, I knew that one day I would no longer be allowed to wander the wild prairies. One day I would be forced to do my duties as an empress. And I was also knew that I would eventually have to find myself an emperor, as it was tradition in our family. My name is Zena Warrior, and I am heir to the Valley of the Wind, and I hold that title with honor, although now I am the Empress, as of telling this story. For years, we had abilities that would make any mortal man lose their minds. We could turn into fat, unbelievably large birds and glide across the skies, making trips in a few moments that would take any normal person days or even weeks. We had the abilities that could completely change the environment around us with the simplest of flicks of our wrist. We could change our appearance to fit however we wanted, and we could change exactly how we wanted everyone to perceive us, but it came at a cost. We had to keep ourselves cut off from the world because we knew that if the world found out who we are, they would try and weaponize our people. Of course, that was never a threat, and it still to this day is not a threat, because we are well hidden. I say we as in our people, my people. Yet, I am no longer hidden to a very, very good friend of mine, who this story is about how I met my dearest friend and my most trusted colleague. Our race grew up quite slow. We did not age as fast as the normal human race does. And I had a brother named Calcifer. Calcifer was, how shall I say, the oddball in the family. Where I was raised to be a proper and decent woman, he was raised to be a warrior. He was raised to protect our continent and all of our people within it. There were small villages dotted around our continent, and we let them do as they pleased, but we still expected them to follow the rules of the land. We had farmers, we had markets, we had prisons, we had jobs, we had libraries and schools like anywhere else. But in the middle of our continent stood my home, the Empress's palace. A large, giant, perfectly crafted castle that stood taller than all of the buildings in the land and rose above the trees in the sky, so that we might watch over our land in peace. It had 4 watchtowers built out of solid quartz, and they were as smooth to the millimeter in perfection. One faced to the north, one faced to the south, one faced to the east, and one faced to the west, each with our languages symbols for those directions. We spoke a language that none of you would be able to fully understand because you'd never translate it. It was an incredible language. Even the simplest words carried strength in them, and some of the simplest words were peaceful, but there were forbidden words that we were not allowed to say, and they were etched onto the wall of forbidden language. In the far north, there were mountains, taller than the clouds that scraped the sky. If you got to the top of them and were lucky, you could stare at the stars for an eternity. To the east, there were deserts, desolate, and yet people could still live there because in the center and around the deserts were ponds of water that stood so still you would swear they were made of glass. And all of our water was pure. To the west, we had the large cities, the large, giant villages that produced all of the tools and food and resources that we ever needed. And yet, for everything that we took out of the ground, we replaced. For every tree we cut down, we planted 2. For every bush that we chopped, we planted 3. And for every rock that we broke from the mountain, we replaced what we didn't use, so that it may be used at a different time. We were an elegant race. We never saw war for 100 or thousands of years. That was until the previous rulers almost completely destroyed the continent, and my mother and father rescued them, rose up against the enemy, and changed the land back into the glorious island and continent that it was. I say island because I thought it was an island. Then I realized when I'm a lot older, it was a continent. And I'm surprised we kept it hidden for so long. While I was writing in my book, I got immediately called by my mother, Ruby. "Zena," she shouted from the other room, "it is time for your dress sizing." She stuttered a little bit, because she knew I was not a fan of wearing dresses at all. "I'm coming," I said to my mother as I closed my book. I hid it away so that my brother could never find it, because I knew if he knew I wrote stuff about my continent like this, or our continent, he'd think it was silly, considering we lived here. I trotted down the long, winding corridors of the court's palace, each of the walls painted in beautiful colors of blue, purple, and gold and reds, greens, and every other color imaginable. All of our paints were repainted almost yearly because it took years and for the paint to chip away. It was so perfect that a single can of paint for us could paint the entire palace in one simple stroke. I walked into the dressing room, and my mother was standing there in her beautiful blue Empress gown. The dressing ladies were hard at work sewing it together to make sure that it was absolutely perfect down to the micrometer. "There you are, Zena," my mother said as I stepped into the room. "We must fit you with your dress. It is a big day today." "But Mom," I said, rolling my eyes at her, "I'm not interested in wearing a dress. I'd rather wear something simple and plain." "Simple and plain?" my mother said, looking down at me. "Like what?" "You know, like what the kids wear who live in the village. Or even what the workers wear over in the big town." "Zena," my mother said, looking at me, as the women who were working on her gown fastened the robe over her shoulders, "you know you're not supposed to wear that stuff. And your father would never approve." "I know," I said, looking at my mom, "but they're just so much more down to earth. Isn't that the right word?" I said, looking down at the floor. "Yes, Zena," my mom said. "That's the right terminology, but you know your father would never approve. He's a very traditional man," she said, bringing her arms down so that the girls could continue to fasten the dress together. "Are you ready for your dress, ma'am?" said one of the girls, walking over to me. "I guess," I said, stepping onto one of the stands. "What color do you want your dress to be?" said one of the gown creators. "I'd like it to be purple," I said, jumping up for joy. "And can it have blue and red accents?" "Are you sure you want blue and red accents?" my mother said, looking at me. "That's a lot of work for these fine ladies, and they're already doing a lot as it is." "It's not a problem, missus," one of the ladies said, looking at her. "We're fine with doing the work for the hair." "Don't overwork yourself, ladies," she said, staring at them. "We do want you to at least get your rest for the night. Don't overwork yourselves." "We won't," they all chimed. There were at least 5 or 6 of them in the room, all wearing the exact same outfit. A simple white gown with a badge that looked like a dress. They were gowns maidens. They were purposely they all purposely picked this path in their lives for this job because they created all of the gowns in the land. Of course, they traveled around to their own shops to create the gowns for different villages and towns. But every now and then, they'd all get a special letter in the mail from my mom, and they'd all come to the castle with their finest felts and their finest silks and sewing needles and all sorts of yarns and ribbons just to fashion her the most beautiful dress they possibly could. It'd take them months or even years to save up the material needed to craft what they wanted for the Empress. And yet, my mother always picked colors that they never brought. She always picked plain and simple, cheap clothing colors, or even cheap fabrics, and they couldn't believe she'd pick such simple fabrics. My mother was a simple woman, but she ruled the country and continent beautifully. They had me raise my arm so they could fashion my first sleeve over my arm. The felt was itchy and coarse and rough, and I didn't like it too much. "Do you have something with silk?" I said, looking at the dress maidens. "Yes, we do, actually. We have plenty of it, Your Majesty," they said as they rushed around the room gathering silk. Zena," said my mother. "What?" I replied, looking up at her. "Don't use the expensive fabrics. It's hard enough for them to gather them. Use something simple, like what they tried." "It's coarse, Mom," I said, looking up at her, "and it irritates my arms." "Well, perhaps you can use a little silk to make it softer," she said, looking at the maidens. "Use some silk to cover up her arm, but please use the rest of the simple fabrics. I don't want you maidens to overwork yourselves, let alone break yourselves in the budget." "Don't worry, Your Highness," one of them said. "We were expecting her to pick the more elegant fabrics." "All right," my mom said, rolling her eyes and looking at me. "I guess you can have the silk fabrics if you wish, dear. If they're okay with it, then so am I." She walked out of the room in her brand new blue and purple gown, and her dress was almost as smooth as diamonds itself. And she stepped out of the room as the 6 maidens began working on my dress. They, of course, covered my arms in silk, and the rest of me they covered in a beautiful cloth that was purple and blue and red, with accents flowing through the gown and the dress. "May I have a cloak?" I said, looking at one of the maidens, and she was quite taken back by this. "A cloak?" said one of the maidens. "You mean like the knights wear?" "Yes," I said, looking at the maiden. "Preferably purple, and made out of the simplest material have, but laced with silk and an emblem." "What do you want the emblem to be?" said the 3rd maiden, grabbing the items to create the cloak. "Can it be in the shape of my family crest?" I said, looking at them. "Absolutely," said the 3rd maiden. "We'd love to fashion a phoenix for you." And she immediately began working on my cloak. The rest of the girls continued to work on my dress as I wandered around the room looking at all the different fabrics. They were imported from all ends of the continent, and yet they all seemed so different. It was all from the same place, but they were all different and unique. Some were rolled up in tubes, others were rolled in barrels, some were in their own crates, and some came as crates. "Would you come over here, miss?" one of the maidens said. "We'd like to fit the blouse on you." "Blouse?" I said, turning around shocked. "I'm not wearing a blouse." "But, Your Highness," said one of the maidens, "your mother specifically requested that we create you a blouse." "I'd rather just wear a regular dress with, perhaps, one of those beautiful cardigans and a flowing cape." "A flowing cape?" said the 4th maiden. "I don't know if that's what your mother would want." "Pretty please," I said, looking at the maidens, flashing my beautiful purple eyes at them. "All right," said the maidens, "we'll create you a simple cape and a decent dress without the blouse." "Would you like it to go to your feet?" they said. Can it drag a little bit on the floor? I said, feeling like I was asking too much. Of course it can. Just not enough to make it dirty, right? I said, looking at the maidens. Of course, they replied. We don't want to ruin your outfit. I hopped back up on the pedestal and they continued to work as if I was a mannequin standing there. Then there was a knock at the door. Zena! There was a shout. That's my dad, I said. What am I supposed to do? Don't worry, said the maidens. We'll hide your dress for you. Go speak to him. They quickly took the dress off me and I bolted out of the room. I was still wearing another dress underneath, of course. Yes, father? I said, walking out of the room. Your mother informed me that you're using the expensive felts. Is that true? He said, looking down at me, wearing his royal suit. Yes, I said, looking up at him. I just wanted them because they're softer. Don't force the maidens to do extra work for you, he snapped. We already have enough problems as it is with money being short and us running out of gold and silver. Honey, shouted my mother from the hallway, don't be mean to her. She's only a child. She won't be a child for long, shouted my father. She needs to learn to grow up, and grow up quickly. My father's name was Emerald, and he held that name high, considering emeralds were the most valuable thing on our land. We didn't have many places where you could find emeralds, and the fact that he had that name, he held it with pride. He married my mother, and my mother had our last name, and the father reluctantly accepted it per tradition. He would have rather kept his name of Ember, but he kept Warrior instead. I think that always made him bitter in some form or another, because, well, frankly, he didn't like being a warrior. He wanted to be a king, which is why he married my mother in the first place. He stormed off, and the maidens quickly beckoned me back into the room. Hurry, we've almost finished with your dress, said the first maiden, as I rushed into the room. It was gorgeous, perfectly matched to me and all the specifications I asked for. Here, said the third maiden, I finished your cloak. It was gorgeous, a long silk cloak with a purple bird on the back, its wings outstretched and laced with gold silk. This is laced with gold, I said, looking at the third maiden. I saved a little extra for you. I thought it would be a nice touch. You didn't have to do that for me, I said, looking at the maiden. Don't be silly, your highness, she said, looking at me. I figured you'd want a special gift, as your family would probably turn it down otherwise. Go hide it in your room, and we'll bring your dress to you, said the fourth maiden. So I rushed to my room at the top of the west tower, and hid the dress. Are you seriously hiding something from our parents again? I heard a voice behind me. I turned around, and there was Calcifer standing in my doorway, his wings out of his back, stretching and curling around him like a shield. He was leaning against the doorpost, as per usual for my annoying brother, but he was definitely there. I'm not hiding anything you're to worry about, I said, looking at him. It's something of mine, and what are you doing in my room anyway? Dad'll never approve of you being in here. He sent me to come fetch you because he saw you running up the hall, he said, smirking. It's time for our coronation, or whatever it's called. You mean the meeting of our people? I said, getting angry with him. Yes, that stupid parade. I'm tired of these parades. I want to just fly through the wind. It'd be so much better. People could see my wings. You're an arrogant fool, I said, brushing past him. Hey, he said, grabbing my arm. I'm no arrogant fool. Calcifer was extremely arrogant, regardless of him wanting to believe it or not. He shared more with my dad than he did my mother, considering he was only my half-brother. He was married into the family, too, but he didn't have the same last name. He had Ember as his name. Just let go of me, I said, wrenching my arm out of his hand. We gotta just go do this thing and then we can go have fun together, I said, not realizing that we had plans for after the parade. You serious? He said, looking at me, actually smiling for once. Yeah, we can fly to the north. Maybe we can meet our old friends up there. Sure, he said. I'm more than willing to fly to the north with you. His wings folded into his back and he looked like any normal person, and we started trotting down the court hallways. As we walked, we looked outside through the balcony of the West Wing Tower. Millions of people were gathered outside of the castle waiting for my mother and father and my brother and I to walk through the kingdom, checking out all the local businesses. Every month we had a parade, and during the parade, each of the local businesses would come out and bring their finest wares for us to look at, and each of us of the family got to pick one ware to take back to the castle and leave and present to the rest of the village as the finest it could be. Calcifer always picked the swords. I preferred to pick the dresses, and on rare occasions, I'd even pick bowls or plates. My father constantly picked the finest wine that could be brought into the kingdom, and my mother picked the finest musical instrument. The maidens came walking up the hallway and met me and Calcifer midway through the hall. Your Highnesses, the maidens said. Calcifer bowed quite deeply, and he almost, I swear, was touching the ground with his forehead. Of course, it wasn't often that his forehead wasn't hitting the ground. He tended to hit a lot of things while he flew. I simply just did a small bow to show my respect towards the women. Your dress, milady, said the fourth maiden, handing me my dress. Would you like help putting it on? Please, I said, stepping into the changing room with the maiden. The other 5 went with Calcifer to put on his garbs. I'm not wearing this, he said, looking at them. It's too extravagant. Your father requested it, Calcifer, said one of the maidens. It would make him proud. Fine, he said. Let's get this over with. We started to walk towards our parents' room, and we waited for them outside. We heard them bickering quite heavily. I forget and neglect to mention that my father did not have the same abilities that his son possessed, and did not share nor like the abilities that me and my mother possessed. Of course, me and her being royalty, he really didn't have a choice but to accept it. They stepped out of the room, and my mom didn't seem as happy as she did when she was putting on her new dress. She seemed down and upset. Come on, let's go, shouted my dad as he walked down the hall. Jeez, said Calcifer, that didn't end well. You heard everything? I said, looking at him. How could I not? They were basically shaking the whole castle, he said, following his dad. I walked in on my mother. Mom, I said, looking up at her, are you all right? I'm fine, sweetie, she said in a soft voice, one that I tend to share. It's just, your father's concerned about something that came up. What's wrong? I said, looking up at her. Well, we've caught wind that there's a possibility that our continent's been discovered. Our continent's been discovered? I said. It's nothing serious, your mother said. Just a couple people who are trying to chart new lands on their maps and accidentally ran aground on the eastern border. As far as they know, or as far as our intelligence says, they just think it's a desert wasteland. They're planning on moving out soon. What about the villages on the east border? I said, looking up at her. Don't worry about them, she said. They're all well hidden. We can only be seen by people we want to be seen by, so they don't know they've landed on the eastern village. All right, I said, following my mom out of the room. And then I noticed her makeup was slightly smudged. Mother, I said, your makeup. Oh, silly me. I must have smudged it when I was putting on my gown, and she quickly fixed it and continued down the hall. We got out into the courtyard, and it's one of the largest courtyards I have ever been in, still to this day. It was almost a football field's length and a football field's width. It was about 100 yards both directions, so 100 by 100. We had trees and a garden, and even a tiny man-made river flowing through it, and we all strolled through Mom and Dad walking in front of us, me and Calcifer reluctantly walking arm in arm. We got into our carriage, which was beautifully crafted out of the finest wood that could possibly be made. My dad had a tendency that if it wasn't the finest thing out there, he wanted nothing to do with it. So everything had to be perfect. Whereas Mom preferred the older carts from years back when. We hopped into the cart, Mom and Dad sitting in the front half of the carriage, and me and Calcifer sitting on the open air part of the back. We preferred it a little more than sitting inside. Two giant horses led the cart. They stood so tall, I'm pretty sure they stood taller than what you would call a semi. And they began to trot out of the beautiful iron gates that blocked everyone from entering the castle. As we got out into the stone pathways, all of our paths were cobblestone except the main city roads, which we paved ourselves. We had the tools necessary to create concrete and other things like that, but most of our houses were built out of stone and wood, and occasionally there was a brick house, but it was very rare. Everyone began to clap and cheer as we strolled through the villages along the way through the castle, outside of the castle. Me and Calcifer were waving and enjoying ourselves, but I noticed Calcifer kept pulling on his royal outfit. He started to grumble and groan through the trip, and I turned to look at him. "Are you alright?" I said, looking at him. "This outfit is just so itchy and uncomfortable. I just hate it, and it's hot out." "Well, you're the one that chose black, stupid," I said, looking at him. And frankly, everything he wore was black. Except for his boots. He always seemed to like red boots. "Stop bickering back there," I heard my dad shout, "and continue looking towards the crowd." Well, we continued to look towards the crowd and wave and cheer and smile at everybody that we passed. There were thousands upon thousands of people lining the streets as we marched our way through. Soldiers stood in front of us, their wings outstretched wide, at least several feet in length, showing their pride, with several soldiers behind us with their wings folded up as shields on their back. People continued to clap and cheer until we got to the center of town. We all disembarked from the carriage and began to walk through the small stores. Dad never liked this part, but I loved it. The simple plates made of clay, the simple forks made of wood, and some of the most elaborate and beautiful lighting we ever had. There was no electricity on our continent. There was maybe one or two places that actually had electricity, but we hardly ever used the electricity anyway. Everything was lit by torches and lanterns. Kind of like what you would call the medieval days. But for us, it was very modern. We did have a few modern vehicles, a few ships, and a handful of motorized vehicles. And we had one airplane, but everyone hated it. Thank you for the follow! Katie and Gamer, thank you for the follow. Hope you're enjoying the story so far. We walked through a small pottery store that was definitely not the greatest, but it was beautiful for me. There were pots, bowls, even vases and vases. All different kinds of beautiful artwork was sprawled across the different items on the shelves. Different points at different times, we had to pick what we liked out of the shop. I picked a simple painted blue bowl with some fish that looked like they were bouncing up and down through the waves. My brother picked literally nothing. He could care less what was in the store. Same with my dad. However, my mother decided to pick up a flute that was carved out of wood and was painted a rainbow in color. still here and enjoying the story. Thank you, Cameron. We left that store and continued to walk through the village towards the bakery. I'm going to take a brief break because I got to get a drink and I got to stretch my legs real quick, and I will be right back to continue the story. Still, thank you for the follow, Katie. I'll be right back. When we stepped into the bakery, it smelled amazing. The breads, the pies, the cakes, the brownies, the cookies, you name it, it was all in this local bakery. The smells were as if you walked into a giant smell-o-vision, if that's even a thing. I've heard it's a thing. The breads were piled high, all different kinds. And the cookies, I couldn't name them all. My brother decided immediately to grab the biggest and largest box of cookies. But the bake shop owner didn't seem to be too proud of that. "That's a very expensive product, young man," she said, walking over. "If you want to display it, I only have so many of them." "I'd love to display it," he said. "I love this many cookies." "All right," she said, and handed the box over. I looked at the woman, and she seemed very sad that my brother took such a large box of cookies. "Ma'am," I said, walking up to her. "Yes, m'lady," she said. "How long did it take you to make those cookies?" "About 3 or 4 days," she said. "It takes a lot to make such a large box of cookies." "Do you have any smaller boxes?" I said. "The smallest one I have is only 2 cookies," she said, "and it takes me about an hour to make them, but they're not the greatest." "May I have a box of those?" I said, looking up at her. "Sure, Your Highness," she said, and handed me a small pink box with only 2 tiny cookies in them. They were probably no larger than our smallest coin. And I took a bite of one of them. "This is amazing," I said, salivating at the deliciousness of the cookie. "You really think so?" said the bakery owner. "Absolutely," I said. "I've never tasted such a fine, small cookie. You should make more of these. They're delicious." "I shall, Your Highness," she said, smiling again with a sparkle in her eye. "I shall." Of course, my father didn't pick a single thing out of the bakery, but my mother picked a small box, of bread that was baked into the shape of music notes. "I would like one of these boxes," she said, pointing at it. "The music notes," said the bakery owner. "They're very difficult to make." "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," said my mother. "Is there anything similar to it that's easier to make?" She said. "Why, yes, I make small piano cookies," said the bakery owner, and handed one of the cookies to my mother. She took a bite, and she smiled. "This tastes as beautiful as the music that it would have created," she said. The bakery owner smiled. "Thank you, Your Highness," and bowed. "Would you like a small box of them?" "I'll just take this one," she said, smiling. "Oh," she covered her mouth. "Maybe I should take a whole cookie." "Yes, Your Majesty," she said, and handed another cookie to my mother. The last shop in the town was the musician's store, my mother's personal favorite. everything in the store was crafted out of wood and finely sanded down to make the most beautiful of notes. It was flutes and guitars, drums and trumpets made of brass. There were all kinds of amazing instruments, even a wooden drum set, though it was more like bongos, really. But to us, it was a drum set. There was even a large, hand-carved wooden piano sitting in the middle of the store. My mother jumped for joy. "Oh dear, look at this," she said to my dad and pointed at the piano. "What a gorgeous piano!" "It took me 10 years to carve that piano," said the shop owner, "and there's none other like it in the world." "It's gorgeous," said my mom, staring at it. "Do I have permission to play it?" She almost sounded like a child, and the shop owner was quite surprised. "Ma'am, no one's ever played that piano, but you're more than willing to try," he said. My mother sat down and immediately started to play the piano. Within seconds, perfectly pitched notes flew from the piano and sang throughout the village, and people gathered around and listened to my mother play the most marvelous tune they had ever heard. And the shop owner wept. "That's gorgeous," he shouted. "I've never heard such beautiful music before." "Would you like the piano?" he said, looking at my mother. "I don't want to take something of yours that took you 10 years to craft," she said, getting up from the piano. "I wouldn't know where to put it." "Ma'am, with all due respect, I request that you take my piano," he said. "I can always craft another, even if it'll take me another 10 years or more." My mother, reluctantly, but willingly, took the piano and brought it over to the cart that we were riding, and put it in the very back with us. She put the bench with it too. "Do you have any other beautiful instruments?" she said, smiling. And the shop owner was surprised. "Ma'am, I thought you were only going to display one instrument," he said. "With your shop, good sir," she said, "I could display them all." I've never seen the shop owner smile in such a way, and I haven't seen it since. The shop owner said, "Well, I do have this other instrument, but I don't know what to call it." "Well, let me see it," she said, walking with him to the room full of experimental instruments. There, in the room, was what you would consider a guitar, but it was made out of iron and bronze instead of wood. "This is a guitar," she said, looking at it. "Yes," said the shop owner, "but it is made of a different element than wood, and it makes a much more interesting noise." "Do you mind if I try it?" said my mother. "I don't know if you can play it," said the shop owner, "but you may give it your all." She picked up the guitar with a heave. It must have been very heavy with the elements that it was used to be crafted from. She began to strum a few strings of the guitar. It sounded almost metallic, but at the same time, it sounded as if it was a wind chime blowing on a porch or a swing. "This is incredible," said my mother. "May I display this as well?" "By all means do so," said the shop owner. "But I request you take no more instruments. I do need something to sell." He chuckled. So we left the shops, turned the cart around, and headed back to the castle. The crowds had practically dispersed by now because it was getting late in the day, and it was an afternoon for us after all. When we arrived back at the castle, the guards helped us to remove the piano and the instruments from the carriage. "Place the piano in the ballroom," said my mother, and the guards carried it with effortless ease to the ballroom. "And the guitar?" said one of the guards. "Place it in my room, please," she said. "I would like to practice playing it more." "And the baked goods?" said the third guard. "The children will eat them. We won't have time to display them," she said. "Please take them to the dining area. and the kitchen and the pantry. The guards took all of the different artifacts away and hid them in the areas that my mother requested. Me and Calcifer got down. "Can we get changed out of more outfits now?" I said, looking up at my mom. "No, dear, we still have something left to do." "Still something left to do?" shouted Calcifer. "You never told me about this." "I didn't know anything about this," I said, looking at Calcifer. "I thought we were only doing the parade today, Mom." My mother looked down at me and smiled. "Tonight we shall fly over our kingdom, and I will show you all of our land. Because one day you will rule this land yourself." "Mom, can we do it another night?" I said, looking up at her. "No, Zena," she said. "We must do this tonight." "As usual," said Calcifer, "keeping promises with one person, but not me." "Calcifer," I said, looking at him before he walked away, "you can fly with us." "I guess technically he could fly with us," said my mother, "if he so wishes." No, he said sarcastically. "You want to spend time with her and not me. I understand. I'm the oddball after all, the crazy wacko." "That's not true, Calcifer," she said, but before she could continue talking, he was out of earshot. "That poor boy," my mother said. "He'll never understand how important he really is." "I don't think any of us understand how important he really is," I said, rolling my eyes. Now, come on, let's go." My mother outstretched her beautiful blue wings, and I did the same with my purple wings. And we took off for the skies, and we flew to the northern border, which I had done numerous times. "Mom," I said, flying with her. "What is it, dear?" she said, looking at me as we flew side by side. "I've done this countless times. What makes this any different?" I said, looking at her. "Because tonight there are no clouds in the sky." And she was right. I didn't even notice that we were flying where the clouds would be. And lo and behold, there wasn't a single puff of cloud in the sky. "Why are we flying over the villages and the towns and the outposts?" I said. "We're not looking at those," she said. "We're looking up, towards the sky." I was confused and tilted my head upward, and the entire galaxy could be seen above our continent. As if looking in an observatory, or even one of those pictures online. It was so clear it was as if the Earth itself was gone, and all that was left was the space and our galaxy. "My goodness," I said, looking up at the sky. "It's beautiful." "Each of those stars," she said, "is the number of days of peace that we've had on this continent. And when my time comes, it will be your turn to carry the beacon to guard this land and protect it, so that more days can go to the heavens." "But you're not planning on leaving me anytime soon, right?" I said, looking at her as we stopped at as one of the villages. "No, I don't plan on leaving anytime soon," said my mother as we walked into the town. It was quiet. Everyone was asleep, and the only person up was the local baker, getting ready to make the fresh bread for the next morning. "Then why are you telling me this?" I said, looking up at her. "Because your father fears that war is coming to our land, and per tradition, he and I shall lead the battle to protect our land. And if you don't come back," I said, looking at her, "then it will be up to you to lead this country, and this continent, and your people." "But I'm not even of age yet," I said, looking at her. "I still have a few years left, don't I?" "Yes, that is true. You still have a few years left," she said. "But your brother is younger than you, and frankly, I don't trust him with ruling this continent." We got to the very end of the village and looked up to the snow-capped mountains that surrounded the north end of our continent. "One day, you'll be able to fly so high that even these mountains will look like dots on the land," she said, looking down at me, and then looking up at the mountain. "And one day you'll fly so high that the entire planet will look like a simple marble, I said, "Is that even possible?" Looking up at my mom. "Not really," my mom said. "Just high enough so that you can see the whole world at least." "The whole world?" I said, looking up at my mom. "But I thought we were the world." "No, silly," she said, turning around and beckoning me to follow her. So I did. "We are merely a small portion of a giant planet known as Earth, and one day you will get the luxury to travel to beautiful lands and see incredible things." "Incredible things like what?" I said, starting to skip behind her through the cobblestones. "You'll get to see different countries and continents, towns and villages and cities, and you'll see things that often don't make sense. But one day, you will meet someone, and he will be the most impressive and interesting person you've ever met." And I stopped dead in my tracks. "Mom, you're not giving me the hubby-bubby speech, are you?" I said, looking at her. "You'll have to have this speech someday, sweetie," she said, looking at me and getting on one knee. "But I'm only telling you that someday it'll happen." "Mom, that's weird," I said. But little did I know that she wasn't wrong. A few days later, I was woken from that night. I went to bed after coming home, and I couldn't stop thinking about what my mom had told me. "Wonder what else is out there," I said to myself in my room. And I got up and looked out my window to the west. As far as I could see, there was the towns that surrounded my continent. But way, way off in the distance, there was a light. And I had no idea what that light was, but it was always there at night. And it wasn't from our continent, and it was never from one of our villages, but it was always there, always shining. It was white as the normal sky, but it wasn't natural, or so it felt. I went back to bed and pushed these shots on the proverbial shelf. That was until in the morning when there was a loud rumble. I jumped out of bed and scrambled for my window, and all I could see was the troops running and marching away from the castle. I immediately ran to go get my brother, who was in the north tower. He preferred it over there. "Calcifer," I said, slamming on his door. "Calcifer, get up! The army is marching!" Calcifer basically almost kicked down his door. "They're what?" he shouted. "And they didn't invite me?" He immediately grabbed his armor and his shield and sword. "I can't believe we're gonna go fight!" he shouted, basically almost leaping for joy. "Wait a minute!" shouted my mother, and immediately came running up to us. "You're not going anywhere. You're staying here," she shouted. "It's tradition for the parents to do the fighting, not the kids. You two keep the village safe. It's unlikely they'll ever get this close to the castle." "Fine," said Calcifer. "We'll protect the kingdom. Or this village, or whatever. We'll protect it," he said. Immediately, he set down his armor and his shield and just kept his sword. Me, I was frightened. I couldn't dare think of trying to fight, let alone harm somebody. Mother then got on her knees and looked at me. "Zena, I need you to promise me that whatever happens today, or whatever happens in the next couple days, you will not leave this castle. You will not abandon your people." "But, Mom, what if they come to the castle?" "Then spread your wings and fly. Fly as far as you can away from here. And whatever you do, don't let anyone ever catch you or know who you truly are." What do you mean?" I said, looking up at her. "You managed to fly far to the west. There's a country that may be able to protect you, but if they find out who you are, they will judge you, and they will question you, and they'll never see you as an individual that's equal to them. But you could potentially hide there, because the people that are attacking would never dare look there." "Okay," I said, looking up at her. Thankfully, just a few days later, Mom and Dad returned home. But they were deeply injured. "Mom," I shouted, rushing over to her when she walked in. "Don't worry, sweetie. We defended them off, and your mama and Papa are safe." She said, "They won't be coming back anytime soon," said my dad. And I looked up at him and said, "Why?" And he shouted with a bold voice, "'Cause we got 'em all! Every last one of them, and we've sent cleaning crews out to get rid of, well, everything." "But what about our people?" I said, looking up at him. "We lost a couple of them, but not for anything that wasn't a great cause," he shouted. Calcifer immediately started jumping for joy. "We kicked their ass," he shouted. "Language," shouted my mother. "We don't say that word in this household." "Sorry," said Calcifer. "I apologize for my foul language." I snickered because he was a bit of a quack. That night, when after my family got home, we were all in the dining room, eating our wonderful meal. "Tell us about the war," said Calcifer, basically jumping out of his chair. "There's not much to talk about, son," he said, "but you best believe your father was leading everything." "Yes, you were, sweetie," said my mom. "You were leading everything, and I was right beside you. Just as tradition," he said. "It's always tradition with you. Why not try something new, something fresh?" "Fresh?" my mother said. "What do you mean, fresh?" "Well, you've always led a peaceful life here on this continent, right?" He said. "Yes, but you are from the land of the South, and they tend to prefer war," she said. "Ah, war, that's where all our warriors come from, is the South. So, why not we conquer another island?" "An island?" my mother said. "Conquering is not what we do. We're a peaceful people." "All right," said my dad. "I guess we won't conquer an island. Let's conquer a village." "What village would we conquer?" my mother said. "We rule all of the land. And we rule the air." "We can't rule all of the air now," said my father. "We still have that human artifact sitting in our courtyard." "What, that stupid metal bird?" said my mom. "You mean an airplane?" I said. Both of them seemed very shocked that I knew this. "An aeroplane?" said my mom. "Where are you coming up with that word?" "It was written on the side of the bird," I said. "It reads airplane something I couldn't make out, but it reads airplane." "An airplane," said my dad. "Maybe we could make our own airplane." "Why would we need to?" said my mother. "We can fly." He then looked at her with extreme anger, and I guess she forgot that he couldn't fly. "Well, I can't fly," he bellowed. "Maybe we could build something like that for me." "So you can do what?" said my mother. "You already have jobs that you can do here." "Well, can't a man fly? All of our soldiers are men and they fly. Why am I not allowed to fly?" "Maybe you could fly," I said, looking at him. "Just not the way you're thinking." He didn't seem to like that, but he continued to eat his food. And very angrily, a few moments later, sent me and Calcifer to bed. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what my mom said a few days ago about the country to the west. What kind of people will live there? I said to myself, laying in my bed. I wonder what kind of gadgets and gizmos and beautiful things they have over there. Many, many years went by. I want to say at least 100 or so. And I finally became of age. I know that sounds insane, but I have said before, time doesn't mean much to my people, and we age very slowly. Emperors and empresses tend to live for thousands of years. And it was finally time for me to get my family crest. As per tradition, I got to pick the 2 locations where my family crest went. And the maidens who did the dresses also provided crests for the families. They either provided emblems that were worn on necklaces, emblems on clothing, or, per tradition of royalty, the emblems were tattooed onto our arms or wherever I wanted them. So I went to the maiden's dressing room, and there sat the 6 beautiful maidens from a few hundred years ago. "Your Majesty," they shouted, "it's so good to see you. You've aged amazingly." "We all age wonderfully," I said with a more soft and adult tone. "That's true, Your Highness," said the first maiden. "So, you've become of age," said the 6th maiden. "Yes, I have," I said, "and I'm ready to accept my place in this family." "That's excellent to hear," said the 3rd maiden. "So, where would you like your crests to be placed? Or what would you like them made out of?" said the 4th maiden. "Can I have one on my left arm?" I said, looking up at them. "Your left arm?" said one of the maidens. "I don't understand." "The left arm is closest to the heart, is it not?" I said, looking at them. "And I want my family to always be the closest to my heart that they can be." "That's sweet of you," said the 2nd maiden. "We shall start work on it immediately." "What color would you like the crest in?" said the 3rd maiden. "Purple," I said, looking at the 1st maiden. All of them shrugged. "We should have guessed," they said simultaneously, and began work printing the crest onto my arm. They printed the first crest traditionally with the wings folded across one another, as if representing a shield across the body of the bird. Our family crest was the phoenix. "Where would you like your second crest?" they asked. And I looked at all of them and blushed. "Your Highness," they said, "is something all right? Would you be willing to close and lock the door, please?" I said to the maidens. The 2nd maiden was confused, but obliged, and closed and locked the door. I removed my gown and dress, and the maidens were very confused by this. "Can I have my 2nd family crest across my own chest?" I said, looking up at them. They were all astonished by this. "You wish to display it that openly?" they said, looking at me. "Yes," I said, looking down, blushing. "I know it's not traditional, but I want to be different." They all looked at each other and were definitely concerned. "Are you sure your mother will approve of this?" they said, looking at me. "Well, does she have a choice?" I said, looking at them. "It is my choice where the emblems go, right?" "Well, yes," said the 5th maiden, "but so openly and so out in the, well, sensitive areas," I said, looking up at them. "Precisely," said the 5th maiden. "Are you sure this is what you want? Because you can't take it back." "Yes, I want the wings outstretched across my chest," I said, looking up at them. "Or at least slightly above, so it doesn't hurt as much." "As you wish, Your Highness," said the 5th maiden, as she sprawled the wings across my shoulders to my other shoulder and placed the bird firmly in the dead center of my chest. Of course, I wasn't what they would say built differently, but I had more muscle mass than my brother, so I did have, better arms than him. And legs. I was a runner. Don't take it out of context, I know you pervs. But yes, I wanted it to be that open. I immediately threw back on my dress and threw on my brand new cloak, which they had recently remade for me so it fit my more, what's the word you folks call it? Teenage self. Even though I was nowhere near a teenager. "Bring in her mother," said the 5th maiden, worried about what was going to happen. My mother stepped into the room. "Zena," she shouted, "you have your crest!" And she saw the crest on my left arm. "Yes, I do," I said, smiling. "Do you like the way I have it displayed?" "Absolutely," she said. "So traditional and so perfect, and on your left arm, so it's close to you always." "Yes," I said, smiling. "It will always be close to me. It is the family symbol, after all." "Where's your second one?" "On your leg?" she said, lifting up my cloak. She began to be more accepting of the cloak after the first couple years of me deciding to wear it. No, I said, starting to get worried. On your other arm? She said, holding my other arm. No, I said, looking down at the ground. Is it on your back? She said, turning around and lifting up my cloak. No, I said, looking down at the ground. The maidens all stepped back a few paces. Where is it? It's traditional to have two of them, my mother said. I pulled my dress down slightly so she could see the corner of the wings on each of my shoulders. Zena, she said, looking extremely depressed. You didn't. Yes, mother, I said. I sprawled it across my shoulders. Zena, sweetie, that's not tradition. You can't do that, she said. What will your father say? I don't care what you two say anymore, I snapped, completely accidentally. I wanted to be different. I wanted to be special. Just accept the fact that I chose something a little different than the norm. But Zena, shouted my mom, basically through tears. How large is it? She shouted, and I revealed the entire crest to her. Zena, she shouted, basically on her knees now. Why would you do this? If I may interject, ma'am, said the fifth maiden. You may, ma'am, said my mother. She believed that if it was sprawled across her chest, that it would be the closest it could possibly be to her heart. And in doing so, not only did she break tradition, but she also wanted you to know that you'd always be with her, no matter what. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This maiden was clearly lying through her teeth. And my mother stopped crying. Is that true, Zena? She said, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. I couldn't help but try not to break my mother's heart. Yes, I said, that is true. Well, then I guess it's okay, she said, looking up at me and standing to her feet. Just promise me you won't be too open about it. Of course not, I said. The one on my arm is the one I want to show the most. Alright, fine. I'll accept it, but I'm only accepting it for you. If your brother did this, I don't know what your father would say. He'd say I was a buffoon. Calcifer was standing in the doorway, and I had no idea he was. How much of that did you see? I said to Calcifer, extremely pissed off. I didn't see anything that was too personal, he said, but I heard enough to know what's going on. You broke tradition, he shouted. Not necessarily, said the maidens. Quiet, he shouted. Father would be very pleased to hear this. Said my mother, standing up. Calcifer, just stop. She didn't break any tradition. It's commonplace for her to pick wherever she wants the emblem to be. You'll get the exact same treatment one day. Is this true? He said, looking up at my mom. Yes, it's true, she said. Right, whatever. If she can do it, then so will I. If you can handle it, said the maidens. It is a crazy procedure. Whatever, he shouted. It doesn't matter to me. He left the room. I didn't know at the time that this might be the last time I see my brother, because the messenger came flying straight into the door and landed right in front of my mom. Ma'am, we have words that all four corners are being attacked simultaneously. Being attacked? My mother said. What's going on? We believe it's people trying to rediscover a continent, and they seem to have found our people. We need to send the troops out immediately. Right away, said my mother, and she took off with the messenger, and before she left the building, she turned and looked at me. Zena, you must promise me the same promise that I asked you years ago. I remember, I said, if anything happens and the castle falls under siege, fly west. Yes, she said, Go as far west as you can. Calcifer. She looked at Calcifer, and Calcifer looked at her. Yes, Mom, he said. You will stay here and defend this castle. Why must I stay here and she's allowed to flee? Shouted Calcifer. Simple. You're stronger than me. I lied through my teeth to him. That's true, he said. I am the strongest. I rolled my eyes, but I guess he didn't see it. Within a few hours, we saw troops marching towards the castle. My goodness, said Calcifer. They're back already? Those aren't our troops, I said, looking at Calcifer. Those are the enemy troops. Enemy troops, said Calcifer. Check the other corners of the kingdom. We bolted to two different ends of the castle. He went east and I went west. There were troops coming from all directions. And I checked north and he checked south, and they were coming from those directions too. We're cornered, he said. What do we do? You do the only thing that Mom would want us to do, I said, immediately spreading my wings. What are you gonna do? Said Calcifer. Just abandon us? Wrong, I said. I'm gonna go find help. Suddenly, the messenger came back and collapsed in front of us. They're all gone, he said. All of the kingdom. It's falling apart. Calcifer, I said, looking at him. What do you want, Zena? He said, looking back at me. I gotta go. I gotta go obey Mom's wishes. So what, you're just gonna abandon me like this? Well, think about it this way, I said, looking back at him. At least you get to rule the kingdom now. That's not funny, said Calcifer, looking at me angrily. Grab your sword and shield, I said. You'll be able to defeat these men easily. But I must obey Mom's wishes. Send for me if anything happens, okay? I said, looking at him one last time. You're an idiot for doing this, you know that, right? He said, looking at me. How am I an idiot for doing this? I'm just obeying Mom's wishes. You realize the only reason Mom is sending you west is because it's the closest country. But I've been there, and I pray you come back. You pray that I come back? I said, looking at him bewildered. You're not going to like it there, he said. If anything, you should probably hide who you are. They won't like you. I don't believe you, I said, but I grabbed my black felt face mask that I always carried around for good luck and put it over my face. Is that better? I said, looking at him. It's probably the best you're going to get, he said. But go. I'll defend the castle. So I quickly shot straight up into the air, higher than the clouds, so that the army couldn't see me, and I began to fly west. I started thinking about what Calcifer said. Maybe he's right, I said. Maybe this place I'm flying to, I should hide who I am. Not tell anyone. Then again, I'm going into a newfound land, and I'm not going to trust a single person. So, using one of my abilities, I made it impossible for anyone to see my face. If I ever removed the mask, the ability that I had made it so that they had amnesia and forgot everything that happened prior to them seeing my face. But not anything critical or important like childhood memories or who they are or anything like that. Just the fact that they ever saw it or the fact they ever met me. I believed I'd never take it away. That all changed years later. I kept flying and flying and flying, and then I realized that I'm still wearing my royal outfit. And the place I'm going to doesn't have royalty. So I quickly, on the fly, changed into a t-shirt and some sweatpants and threw on some flip-flops. I guess that's what you call them, I'm not 100% sure. As I continued to fly, I started to hear noises that didn't make any sense to me. Sounds of honking and people yelling and shouting. And I noticed that the light that used to be off in the distance was growing closer and closer. I must be where I'm supposed to go, I said to myself. And I began to lower myself underneath the clouds as I flew. I almost hit a giant building and swerved. There was a massive city underneath me. Streets and vehicles and all kinds of people shouting and screaming and yelling and calling each other names and using such profane language. I couldn't believe what I was hearing or seeing. There was all of this just anger and hate. I could feel it in the air and around me everywhere. What kind of place am I in? None of these buildings look like where they were from my home country. All of the buildings looked like they were made of glass and concrete and metal. And the motor vehicles looked nothing like my horses and carriages back home. I quickly stopped at the top of a building and looked down. I must be at least 100 or more floors up, I said, looking down. Hey, came a voice behind me. What are you doing up here? How did you get here? I turned around and I realized I was wearing my cloak and a mask. And I must have looked like a criminal. The man grabbed something at his chest and began speaking. Hold on a second, I said. I'm not an enemy. The man immediately raised a weapon to me, and I jumped off the building. We gotta jump her, I heard him say very briefly, and I spread my wings again and flew down the streets. Everyone started to scream and yell and point at me as I flew down the street, trying to escape and evade everything I could. There were lamps that looked green, yellow, and red, and there were these giant metal lamps that blinded me as I flew down the street. All of the motor vehicles had the same blinding lights, and there were people just staring and screaming and pointing. I couldn't take it, and I shot straight upward and away. I later learned that I flew straight into New York City. I didn't realize it was New York City at the time, but I guess I flew straight into it. And I began to cry, because it felt like I was the only one of my kind in the world. I knew I wasn't, but it felt like it. I kept flying and flying until the noisy, bustling sound of New York left in the distance, and I stopped in a field. The field was completely empty except for a couple stalks of corn and a few trees. Those are some odd-looking bushes, I said, looking at the trees. They're not as big as the bushes at home, but they're definitely not trees. I continued to sit in the field and just rest. I don't know how long I'd been flying, nor where I even was, but I knew if I kept going, I would either get caught or in trouble. Then a car immediately drove by. And as they drove by, I heard people scream at me. I looked over my shoulder and I realized my wings were still outstretched. I quickly folded them into my back, made them vanish. Because I feared that if anyone saw them, that they would judge me for my wings. So I decided from that point forward, I would walk on foot to the nearest town. I also decided at this point that I wasn't going to tell anyone my real name. I didn't want anyone to know. So I decided to make it impossible for anyone to say my name. With a single outstretched arm, I could silence them in a moment. Or so I thought. I never tried it before. I kept walking for at least another mile or two when I stumbled across a tiny town. It wasn't very large. There was maybe 10, 15, I counted at least 40 houses. But there was one tall brick building standing in the middle. That's where I'm going to go to find my information, I said to myself, and began to walk through town. As I walked through town, I pulled my purple cloak over my head so that people couldn't see my long, flowing purple hair. And I eventually realized that if I was going to blend in with these people, I needed to change my appearance. So I thought really hard about it. That I was going to change my appearance to look more, I guess, normal. I thought about it and thought about it. And I thought so hard that I unlocked my ability to shapeshift. My hair turned brown and so did my eyes. And I realize now that I didn't look anything like how I looked in my continent. I walked up to the brick building and I knocked on the door. And a nice woman opened the door. "Can I help you, ma'am?" she said, looking at me. Yes, I've traveled a very long ways and I'm looking for a place to stay, I said in a softer voice, in my quite now adult soft voice. How far have you traveled from? She said. I've traveled from New York City, I said, looking up at her. New York City? Goodness me, come inside, come inside. She beckoned me in. You've traveled from New York City? She said, pulling up a chair. Yes, I said, sitting down. It's been a very long journey. Well, I'm not surprised. It's at least 200 miles from here, she said, looking at me shocked. 200 miles? I said. Yes, it's a very long distance. You couldn't have walked all that way. Someone had to have been giving you a lift. I was getting a lift, I said, but I didn't want to reveal too much about myself. Felt like if I said too much, there would be a problem. What's your name? Said the woman, sitting at a chair next to a fireplace. I'd rather not say. I'm ashamed of my name. I lied through my teeth. Nothing as shameful as here, young dear. You can't be more than 18 or 19 years old. And I stopped before I could speak. I can't tell them that I'm at least 100 years old or even more. And if I tell them that, they might freak. So I'd better just agree with it. Yeah, I'm 19, I said, trying to gather my words. My goodness, you're quite young to be away from home, said the woman. Do you need a family or a place to stay or a roof? I would just like a place to stay for the night, I said, looking down at the floor. May I at least see your face so I may know what you look like? And I looked up, and she noticed I was wearing a face mask. Could you take off the mask for me, please? She said. Tradition says that I'm not allowed to, I said, looking at her. Oh, no, I completely understand your beliefs. I'm sorry for intruding. My beliefs? I thought to myself. I don't know what she's talking about. I have no beliefs that would require me to wear a mask. I'm just choosing to. So, she said, where do you want to stay? I have a couple rooms here, but there's not much I can offer. If you simply just have a bed, or maybe even a cot, the floor might also work too. The floor? She said. Oh, no. A guest of mine will not sleep on the floor. We will get you a bed in your own room, and we will find a place for you to stay. All right, I said. Well, thank you. You're absolutely welcome, she said. And for the record, my name is Miss Stacy. Miss Stacy? I said. Yes, but you can just call me Stacy. But yeah, most people just call me Stacy. Stacy, I said, looking at the ground. What is this place? Why, it's an orphanage, she said. An orphanage? I replied. I've landed at an orphanage? Well, you walked to an orphanage, sweetie, she said, beckoning me upstairs, and I followed suit. Do you have any other clothes or anything of the sort? Yes, I said, looking up at her. I do have clothes. Your eyes are beautiful, said Stacy. They're quite brown. Yeah, I said. It's a family trait. I lied. Well, where are they? She said. I have them tucked away in a back pocket of mine, I lied. Of your cloak? She said. Yes, I said to Stacy. And I followed her into one of the rooms. This will be your room. I apologize that I didn't manage to clean it up, but we just had one of our residents finally move out. Did they become of age, I said. Become of age? You must be from a sophisticated family. Yes, I am, I said, looking at the ground again. Just one question, Miss Stacy. Stacy, please, she said. Yes, sorry, Stacy, I said. Have you heard of any continents to the east of us? To the east of us? No, there's no continents to the east of us. As far as I know, the only continent is, well, several thousand miles away. Several thousand miles away, I thought? That's quite a distance for me to travel. Do you have any preferences of when I wake you up? We do have a chore list, and I do ask that you please help me out. I'm only one person, after all, and I have 17 other kids to take care of. 17 kids? I said, looking at her shocked. Oh, no, they're not all mine, said Stacy shockingly. I raised them because their parents aren't able to. Well, I can assist in raising them, I said in a soft voice, looking up at her. That would actually be lovely. Do you want any pay? No, I expect no pay, I said, looking at Stacy. I'll have to compensate you somehow, said Stacy. Just provide me with a book or two, I said. Yes, of course. I can run to this local store and pick you up a book every week. A new one. Sure, I replied softly. A book would be wonderful. What kind of books do you like? Stacy said as she stepped around trying to clean up my room. I prefer mystery books or adventure books. I like fantasy books more than anything else. Like knights in shining armor and dragons and mystical fairies, said Stacy. Yeah, stuff like that, I said. I realize now that her fiction and my fiction were very different. Well, I'll run to the store first thing in the morning and get you a book, she said. Do you have any preference on an author? Whatever's relevant, I said, as I set my stuff down and took off my cloak. That's a beautiful cloak, said Stacy. You mind if I take a look at it? Absolutely, you may, I said softly. She picked up the cloak and almost gasped. My God, said Stacy. This is the softest cloak I've ever felt. It's so smooth. She felt it through her hands. It's extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary, she said. And is that gold lacing? Yes, I said. It's gold lacing around the phoenix. It's a phoenix, said Stacy. I've never seen one in real life. Really, I said, smiling under the mask. If only she knew, I said, thinking to myself. If only she knew. I laid down in the bed and covered up in the blankets, and Stacy started to step out of the room. Stacy, I said, looking up at her. Yes, Stacy said, turning around. Could you leave a light on for me, please? Or a lantern, or maybe a torch? We have a small old oil lantern. I can go fetch it for you, she said. But it's very old, and I doubt it'll work. Please, go fetch it for me, I said, sounding sad. Of course, my dear, of course. And she rushed downstairs and returned with a very, very old oil lantern. It was very rusty and was clearly falling apart. It's not holding well together, but I'm sure it'll make you happy, I hope, said Stacy. And she lit the fuse inside the lantern. It shone brightly and flickered across the walls. Thank you, Stacy, I said, looking up at her. I hope you find your family, said Stacy, and I'll keep you here for as long as I can. She closed the door, and I listened to her click the lights out. And I was quite surprised by this, because, remember, I didn't understand electricity. The lantern flickered throughout the night, and I simply just watched the flame dance in the cracked glass of the lantern. It danced back and forth across the wall. The shadows and the light just dancing through my whole room. The crackle was somewhat loud, but I was certain it was just the metal groaning from the old lamp. I got up and blew it out because I didn't want to waste the oil inside the lamp, and I sat back down on the bed. I outstretched my wings and stretched them to the tips of the room. I realized now, looking up, that they were touching from wall to wall. I must have grown into my royal wings, I said out loud, hoping that no one heard me. And I folded them back up, made them disappear into my back, and laid down and went to sleep. Not a few hours later, it felt like, there was an alarm ringing loud. I bolted up and ran downstairs. Stacy seemed shocked by this. "Ma'am, are you alright?" she said. "That alarm," I shouted. "Where's it coming from?" "It's the fire department," she said. "They're getting called out of town for a rescue." "Oh," I said, probably looking like I was an idiot. "I'm sorry for the intrusion." "Oh no, I was about to come wake you up anyway. I need some help in the kitchen. I have some heavy things and I can't lift them too well." "Absolutely," I said. "I can help you lift them. What are they?" "There's this large bag of potatoes and another large bag of flour, and I have a difficulty lifting them." "Not a problem," I said, and I quickly shot back upstairs, grabbed my cloak and threw it over my head, and went down to help her in the kitchen. Stacy was bent over trying to pick up these huge, I'm assuming 20-pound bags of potatoes and flour. "Here," I said, "let me get that for you." Stacy stepped back. "Oh, thank you." And she was cut off, because with one hand I picked up both bags, one in each hand. "Where do you want them set?" I said. "Well, my lord," she said, patting her head with a cloth. "You are extremely strong." "Oh," I said, "yeah, I'm naturally built strong." That's incredible," she said. "And what an odd tattoo on your arm." I set the potatoes and the flour on the counter and looked down at my arm. My crest was still showing, plain as day, on my left arm. "Oh, it's my family emblem." "Family emblem?" said Stacy. "Yes, it's tradition that we get my family emblem tattooed when I come of age." "My goodness, that's a very interesting tradition," she said. Anyway, she trailed off. "Would you go wake the others for me real quick?" "Of course," I said to Stacy, and I went upstairs. I took my finger to my crest and said, "Begone." And it didn't disappear. I thought a moment about my family and how I missed them, and rubbed my finger up across the crest, and it disappeared into my arm. I was worried for a moment that I lost it and panicked, so I did this. I thought about my family again, and reversed what I had done, and the crest returned. "Okay," I said to myself, "so it won't disappear if I take it away." So I quickly removed it again, as not to make Stacy worried. I also removed the one across my shoulders and my chest the same way. The first kid I woke up was only about 10 years old, and definitely was a lot taller than the 10-year-olds I knew. "Young man," I shouted, "Stacy has requested to see you in the kitchen." "What?" he said, getting up. "Who?" "Stacy, the nice lady. She's requesting to see you in the kitchen." "All right," he said, and began to get ready, and I left his room. The next person I knocked on the door, he didn't answer, so I creaked the door open. "What do you want, Stacy?" he bellowed. "It's not Stacy," I said softly. "Oh," he said, "enter." And I stepped into the room. "She's requested that you meet her in the kitchen at once." "All right," he said, "I'm on my way." And he bolted down the stairs. The other couple boys that I noticed were all very young, 10, 11, 12 years old. The eldest I had already seen. When I got to the last 3 doors, there were 3 girls, one in each room. One was about 6 or 7 years old, one was 10 to 11 years old, and one was roughly 13 or 14. "Stacy wants you down in the kitchen," I said to all 3 of them softly. "Yes, of course, ma'am," they all said politely, and put on their slippers and went downstairs. Stacy began speaking to all 3 of them, but I couldn't quite hear her through the floorboards. I began to clean each of their rooms. Each room was the exact same in design, but each room was different. "This must be how everyone works," I said to myself. They're all the same, but they're all different somehow. Stacy, I could hear her down in the kitchen, all of a sudden call, Madam! Madame! I assumed she was calling for me, so I came downstairs. I do apologize, ma'am, Stacy said, but I do need a name to call you, because I can't, well, just keep calling you Madam. I said, looking at the floor. Call me Ruby. Ruby, she said. What a beautiful name. I had to get used to that name for a while, until my parents arrived. Years went by and kids came and left the orphanage, and I hardly aged at all. Stacy, though, she aged and aged and aged and got up in years. Suddenly, Stacy started to look old and frail and wasn't able to keep the orphanage running. Will you take care of the orphanage for me? Said Stacy, coarsely. Of course, I said. I'll take care of it for you. Stacy then looked at me with her eyes as she laid in bed, and she asked, Can I please know your real name and who you are? So I told her the truth. I'm Zena, she said. I'm from the land of the Valley of the Wind, and I'm an Empress there. I've been taking care of an Empress this entire time? She said, smiling in her old age. Yes, I replied. You have been taking care of an Empress, and I cannot thank you enough for your hospitality. An Empress in my orphanage, she said. That's a story that the gods would want to hear. The gods? I replied. Isn't there only one? My religious beliefs are different than yours here, she said. But yes, I believe God is smiling down on me for my actions. The very next morning, the police, or so I guessed, were at the house, and I came walking out of my room. You must be Ruby, said one of the officers. Yes, I am, I said, looking up at them. You haven't aged much, one of them said. No, I haven't aged much, I said, looking up at them. The woman here has passed away. Oh, I said. She said before she passed that you are now in charge of the orphanage. I indeed am, I said. Are you able to keep it running? Not for long, I said. I will need a replacement, but I will keep it going until I can find one. We will run it for you, said the police, and we ask you to say goodbye to the children. All right, I said. I'll say farewell to them. I went to each of the 17 rooms and said goodbye to each of the kids. They all hugged me and thanked me for the wonderful hospitality and helping them over the multiple years that they were in the orphanage. Are you leaving, Ruby? Said the youngest, staring up at me. I have an adventure to continue, I said, looking down at her. Will I ever see you again? She said. I don't know, young one, I said, looking down at her. But remember this. You are a princess, and I was your empress. An empress? Said the little one. You mean like the fairy tales? I knelt down next to her. Do you promise to keep a secret? I said to her, whispering. I promise, said the little girl. I looked at her. I'm a real empress, I said. Really? She said, looking at me wide-eyed with blue eyes. Yes, I said, nodding. I am a real empress. Wow, I said. She said, looking up at me. You're amazing. Well, thank you, I said softly. Can you do something special for me, please? She said, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. Of course I can, I said, jumping up with joy. What can I do for you? Can you make me a princess? She said, smiling with her eyes wide open. I hereby pronounce you the princess of this orphanage. Yay! She shouted and danced around her room. I'm a pretty princess. I'm a pretty princess. I still think about that to this day. And I hope she is still believing that she's a beautiful princess. So I grabbed my things, left my room,
and walked down to the landing of the orphanage. Please treat these children with respect, I said to the officer. Considering the legacy you've left, we'll do so. And I left the orphanage. I continued walking until the town was far out of sight, and I decided to stretch my wings out again and fly way up into the air. I continued to fly for several miles before my wings became tired again, and I landed and started walking towards the next town. It was a small town called Metroville, and frankly, it wasn't much of a town. It was more of a city. And little did I know that years later it would become one of the most interesting cities I've ever lived in. I walked over to the nearest police station and I stepped in. "Excuse me, ma'am, you're not allowed to be here," said the officer. "Oh, did I go through the wrong door?" I said softly. "Yes, ma'am, you went through the employee's door. Please come around to the front." Yes, of course," I said, and stepped out and went around to the front. "Can I help you?" said the officer. "Yes, I'm looking for a place to stay." "Do you have a mom and dad?" said the officer. "I don't know anymore," I said, looking at the ground. "Then we will have to find you foster parents, ma'am. Do you know how old you are?" "I'm 19, I said, just coming up with a random number again. "You are rather well fit for being 19, he said, looking at me. "Do you care where your foster parents live?" "No," I said, looking at the ground. "Do you mind telling me your name?" "Ruby," I said, remembering the name I told Stacy. "Ruby. And he typed on his computer. "We don't have any records of a Ruby on file. Do you go by any other name?" I thought for a moment. "Emerald." I thought of my dad's name and regretted that immediately. Emerald. He looked through the files again. "We have an emerald? Someone waiting for an emerald, actually." "Really?" I said. "Yeah, they'll be here in about an hour, actually. They were coming to check up on it today." "All right," I said softly. "Where do you want me to wait?" "Kindly wait on those benches, ma'am, and they will be here shortly." So I sat, and I waited, and I just twiddled my fingers as I waited. Soon, a man in a suit and tie stepped into the police station. "Mike!" said the officer. "How's the family?" "Doing well, he said to the officer. "So, you got any foster kids for me?" "Actually, we do," he said, pointing at me. "This lovely girl just wandered in from the street. Said she's looking for a place to stay." "What's her name?" said Mike. "Emerald," he said. "Emerald? That's just who we were looking for. Someone named Emerald." And the gentleman walked over. "My name's Mike. I'll be your foster dad. Don't think of me as an evil person. I do my best to be nice as possible." I simply just took his hand and shook it. "Emerald," I said, lying through my teeth. "Beautiful name. My wife is waiting outside, and she's not a patient person." "Not a patient person?" I said, looking up at him. "Your eyes are brown. I'm rather surprised." He said, looking up at me, looking down at me. "Do you wish for them to be a different color?" I said jokingly. "Could you make them emerald?" he said, being sarcastic. I looked down and thought about the color emerald, and looked back up at him. "Would this suffice?" "Well, how did you do that?" he said. "I have a few tricks," I replied. "That's incredible. Emerald, please come with me." I stood up with my purple cloak draped over my head and followed him. Outside was a limousine, black and long. "Please, hop in. My wife is in the back waiting for you." I got in, and here was a woman in the back with a makeup pack doing her makeup in a mirror. She seemed very well dressed. So, did you get a girl or a boy? She shouted. Honey, I got a woman. A girl. Sorry. Turned to look at me. Are you a woman or are you a lady? I'm a lady, I said, looking at him befuddled. Ugh, we need a working person, not a fancy class woman. The mom looked over at me and immediately took back what she said. I'm sorry, I didn't realize we were in the presence of a stranger, she said sarcastically. Now, sweetie, said the husband, don't be rude to her. She's only been our presence for less than a minute. I'm going to take a quick breather here, and I will be right back. We're going to wrap up the story here. This is going to be Act 1 of the story. I wanted to do a whole stream altogether, but we will be wrapping up Act 1 right here. I looked at my feet and realized that I may have been dressed like a stranger to these people, but this was my new home. This was what my life was going to be for a long time. And as far as I knew, I was the last of my kind. And when we drove up to their house, it looked just like the castle I grew up in. And there is where we will stop. So, I know, Cameron, you're still here. I'm very happy that you're still here. And I hope you're enjoying Act 1 of the story. Love hearing her backstory. Yeah, I thought everyone would enjoy this. I'm glad. This is Act 1 of her backstory. We will be doing Act 2 probably Saturday. If we don't do it on Saturday, we will be doing it on Monday. I will try and post a schedule here soon of what we're going to be doing. But if you want to hear more of this story, don't hesitate to follow me. By all means, please, for the love of God, follow me. You can hear more of this story. We mostly do gaming streams, though. We don't really do a lot of storytelling streams. This is the second storytelling I've ever done, and this might be the last one for a while. I want to thank Cameron Murray for sticking around, being my awesome moderator, keeping chat in check. Anomaly3259 for also keeping me in check, and keeping chat in check. That's very important. And also, I believe if I spotted him, yeah, Voltrex Gamer 0705 popped in too. But yes, thank you so much for sticking around for Act 1 of Zena, the Empress of the Wind. By all means, please stick around for Part 2. It'll be coming out later this week or next week. And with that being said, have a good night, y'all.